The beginning of time. Back before any video games, films, paintings, anything existed, there was this. A wall. And then, boom. The first piece of art is created. And this guy's like, am I right or am I right, guys? And they all go, and then they may fire or something. Pretty much as far as you go back, art's always been a very central piece of being a human. What a person likes can be such a defining part of who they are, that questions about it are often the first thing someone will ask when they meet you, like, oh, what's your favorite band? Movie, video game, so on. And ironically, on the flip side, that questions like this can be some of the hardest to answer. And along with that, it becomes really difficult to describe why you even like something, like Earthbound, for example. You'll find literally thousands of articles and videos talking about how funny and offbeat this game is, but no one can really tell you much past that, because so much of it is filtered through your experience as a person of what you do and don't find interesting, funny, clever, smart, etc. Except the Mr. Saturns, objectively hilarious. So what is it about this game that connects with so many people across so many different generations now? Well, you have to kind of start with the question of what makes great art. Call me a cynic, but I don't believe anything's wholly original. Virtually everything ever created was inspired by something else. Someone saw something, experienced something, read a book, played a game, watched a movie, and it told them, hey, you like this thing now? And that ended up creating some of the smartest people the world's ever seen and some of the sickest perverts the world's ever seen. But we need to be very clear about what is creating something new with the things you have versus just ripping something off. And this is by no means trying to suggest that no part of a piece of art is that person themselves. I think what ends up distinguishing these remixes from these copies is how that person integrates themselves into their project. An artist may integrate tens, even hundreds of things that inspired them into their work, but the initial inspiration from it came from themselves, and that's their vision of the world. Itoi initially wanted to create the games in order to find a way to connect to his daughter, a person he didn't get to see much of the time because, let's face it, the man did virtually everything you can think of. While that was the controlling motivation for the initial game, and then the later games ended up kind of evolving from this, Earthbound coming from him wanting to experiment more with game design, and Mother 3 with him just wanting to go completely crazy with the story. That central motivation remained the same, his daughter. By the time Mother 3 was finally completed, his daughter had all grown up, and he saw no reason to make them anymore. This is why he's not making a Mother 4. Sure, Itoi borrows heavily from the Blues Brothers and Kurt Vonnegut and Stephen King, but at the center of it, the motivation has always been centered on connecting with his daughter, like a mother. The entire series is extremely bittersweet and just overall pretty warm feeling, and at other times completely contrast this by going so far in the opposite direction.
Special effects are just a tool, a means of telling a story. People have a tendency to confuse them as an end to themselves. A special effect without a story is a pretty boring thing.
Now, some people like to affectionately refer to the practice of using other works in your work as stealing, but I think this is somewhat disingenuous. The term stealing has such negative connotations to it, it's very pejorative. Nor would I say most of the time they're something like homages, because after all, when it's properly done, it becomes that new author's work. I would say this is much more along the lines of sampling, which is done oftentimes in rap music.
I've been trying to make you love me.
And Earthbound even does that a lot. And the pieces of art that Itoi chooses to sample for his own work are done very purposefully. It's much more intricate than just, I like this, therefore it's going in. Though that does happen sometimes. Let's take the sample of Johnny B. Goode, for example. Sure, a lot of people, myself included, immediately think of Back to the Future briefly, but also take a second to think about what this says about this scene. One of the most iconic aspects of all of Earthbound is its contemporary American setting. You're fighting hoodlums in the city suburbs. Of course you're gonna hear Johnny B. Goode. Of course you're going to hear rock music. As nice as this is, it wouldn't fit. Megaton Walk samples Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Now, the reasoning for this sample may seem a bit more abstract than the previous one, but it's no less important and purposeful. Itoi clearly holds the Beatles very near and dear to his heart. Much of Itoi's young adulthood takes place in the 60s when the Beatles were at their height. But imagine, if you will, listening to a band you love for a long time, being used to them sounding like this, and then all of a sudden they sound like this. Its pretty experimental nature would have been very jarring to listeners of the time, and I have no doubt it was for Itoi. Whether we'll admit it to ourselves or not, our first impressions of something, especially art, deeply impact us. Though great in its own right, it's a great departure from what the Beatles were known for and what they had done for a long time, and was something likewise they felt very inspired to make by their surroundings. And regardless if their listeners thought it was weird, great, or grew to like it over time, many of them were struck by the very different nature of it. So why wouldn't you use it as the theme music while a giant man who's now a dungeon is following you through a desert? Though that was clearly not the intended purpose of the record when the Beatles made it, Itoi was smart enough to use it in a specific way to give it an entirely new meaning. I think especially in the internet age where it seems encouraged to pick apart every single thing about a piece of art, and of course that isn't to suggest that art never has any flaws, it seems people forget that art is inherently a very emotional experience. It's tailored around your experience as a person. It's the reason the connection and emotions you felt at the end of Mother 3, someone may have experienced when they played Superman 64.
Now, you will trip on him? Where did he go? Did he go through the ceiling?
However, this doesn't mean we can't be critical of things. But why do we have that consensus? Why is it that it's so generally accepted this is something great while this is awful? Well, you feel it. A vision. I can talk all day about the ingeniousness of the use of references, sampling, and etc. in Earthbound, but at the end of the day, it's because it was Itoi who did it. It's all about the ways he was able to integrate things into a story that he made himself, how he was able to combine them with something he wanted to say. Everyone knows the story of how Itoi created the Gygas fight by trying to channel those feelings he had walking into the wrong movie as a kid. But that's my point. It's not the movie that did the inspiration. It's how he felt about it. And how he used these feelings to create something new that ended up impacting people much more than that movie ever did. There's a reason the most notable thing on this movie's Wikipedia page is its connection to Earthbound. So what makes great art? You do.